Thank you, Professor Hibbert, for the introduction. And hello, everybody. Let me share my slides. So in my presentation today, I'm going to highlight some of the data and information on international students, their social characteristics, and their transition, particularly focusing on Ontario and Quebec, the two major gateway provinces in Canada. The objective is to provide background information to understand and contextualize the challenges international students face and their resilience. So I have collected data from several sources for this study that includes IMDb, Immigrant Longitudinal Database, that has data on temporary and permanent residents between 1980 and 2015. So I used two data files, non-resident file that provides data on international students with a study permit, and integrated permanent and non-permanent resident file that has data on international students who obtained permanent residency. So because this data base is a little bit dated, so I have also collected more recent data from two sources, Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada and the Canadian Bureau for International Education. So here you see the total number of international students between 2008 and 2021. So the total number at the end of each year. And you can clearly see that how the number of international students has been rising over time. Particularly since 2016, we see huge rise. In 2020, there was a dip due to the pandemic, but it's catching up again. If you look at 2021, there's a significant growth. So the government of Canada had a target to bring 450,000 international students by this year, by 2022. But you can see that that number already achieved or even crossed that number in 2017. So the point is that international students are increasing, their number is increasing in Canada. So as their number is increasing, also the number of the postgraduate work permit holders also has been increasing over time. So postgraduate work permit is a permit that international students get after their graduation. It was a one-time permit based on the length of the study of international students used to vary between 1 to 3 years. But during the pandemic, the government actually extended the postgraduate work permit the program for 1.5 years. So international graduates can now extend more than one time, and if necessary, even more than that. So if they have job opportunities and job, they can further extend the permit. So we again see that between 2015 and 2020, the number of PGWP holders grew nearly 4 times. Especially in 2020, this group is the only group whose number actually increased during this year, during pandemic. All other temporary migrants, their number actually decreased due to the pandemic. So only the postgraduate work permit holders actually increased over time. So Crossman and his colleagues showed some of the difference in social characteristics among the postgraduate work permit holders. For example, between 2008 and 2018, their number actually increased 6 times. And if you look at how that increased, like the increased population within this category, you will see that men comprised the higher proportion consistently over this period, throughout this period. And also the proportion of the comparatively younger students or younger people increased those who were 24 years old and younger than that. So from that, we can kind of see that how more younger students are coming in Canada and getting the postgraduate work permit. Most probably the number of undergraduate students increased during this period. And also there is a gender gap in terms of who are getting this permit and not. So this is the most latest data on the top countries of origin from where international students are coming. The data was published by IRCC in 2021. And we see that India comprise the students from India comprise almost half of international students in Canada, 48%, which is a huge proportion, followed by China, France, Iran, and Vietnam. And this scenario kind of changed very quickly within last, I would say, 5 years. Because if you look at the data in 2016 or 15, then you'll see that China was actually the major, the first source country in terms of international students. So we need to think about two facts here. First, international students are not that diverse in terms of countries of origin, because 85% of them are coming from the top five countries. And second, the countries of origin actually change very quickly within a couple of years. For example, it's not only about India becoming the first within last 3-4 years, but also Iran, Vietnam, South Korea, they also had different position in that list. So the characteristics of the students also changing very quickly over time. So now we're going to look at some data from the IMDb. So it provides data, as I mentioned earlier, between 1980 and 2015, and the proportion of international students during that period on average was about a quarter of all temporary residents who came to Canada during that period. So I assume that the proportion is much higher now, as we saw that the number of international students grew significantly after 2016. So most probably currently their proportion is much higher than 25%. So it is not surprising. The majority of these students came to Ontario, almost half of them, followed by only 70% in Quebec. So there's a huge difference in terms of the proportion of students who actually came to these two provinces. But when you look at their level of study, so what kind of degree they wanted to pursue in these two provinces, we see a huge difference, and what kind of institutions and what kind of degree. So we see a huge difference in terms of the proportions between university and colleges. In Ontario, a large portion of international students during that period, 74% attended colleges, as opposed to only 38% in Quebec who attended colleges. So in Quebec, the majority actually went to the university. So it's not clear that whether IMDb included the pre-university education in Quebec, the CEGEP, but still, even if we don't consider that, it's a huge indicator to further study to what extent university and college degree of these students impact their labor market outcomes, especially in the inter-provincial context. So to what extent international students who get college degree from Ontario get jobs in other provinces, and vice versa for Quebec. So if you look at the transition of permanent residency, we can see that the proportion of the international students who obtained permanent residency between 1980 and 2015 is relatively low. it's only 38%. Now, when we talk about transition, sometimes we raise questions about the intentionality of the students, whether international students wanted to transition. So I kind of gathered a few recent data that shows that a high proportion of international students actually showed their interest in applying for permanent residency. For example, Canadian Bureau for International Education did some surveys in 2013-15 as well as 18, and according to their survey, which was conducted in 2018, they showed that 60% of international students plan to acquire permanent residence in Canada. But then if we look at how many or what is the proportion of these students who got permanent residency, for that we see that's quite low. For example, within 1990 and 2014, only 1/5 of them got it within the 10 years of their arrival. And those who arrived after 2000, they also had lower proportion, about 30% within 30% of transition rate within 10 years of their arrival. So the point is that there is a gap between international students' intention in terms of getting permanent residency and actual situation or actual proportion of their the success in terms of getting permanent residency. So if we look at those who got the permanent residency, who transitioned from temporary to permanent status, we can find that you can see that there are some differences in their social characteristics, particularly between the two provinces that I mentioned, Ontario and Quebec. So in terms of gender composition, the distribution of gender, we see that in Ontario, the proportions of male and female international students is much more, they're much more equal compared to those in Quebec, where we see the higher proportion of male international students who transition compared to female international students. In terms of marital status, there's a similarity between these two provinces because the majority of them were single. Even though I need to again emphasize that this is a bit dated data, a little bit old data, so we need to keep that in mind, that to what extent international students, like what would be the proportion of them as single if we think about the current, more recent context. So it is not surprising that the majority of international students who transitioned attended university in Quebec compared to Ontario, because we already saw that the majority of international students came to study in university in Quebec. So their proportion is higher among those who transition. In terms of gender, we see that male international students are more likely to be university educated compared to their female counterparts in both provinces, but the gender gap is a bit bigger in Ontario than in Quebec. So if we think about migration category, the majority of international students applied as principal applicants. Again, we see kind of gender gap. For example, the male students comprise the largest share of principal applicants than their female counterparts in both cases, but it's more in Quebec. So the gap is more in Quebec. So we kind of, at this point, see that gender is actually an important variable for these two provinces in terms of social characteristics. So their social characteristics and their ability to gain permanent residency to some extent connected to gender. So again, this chart shows kind of expected scenario that the majority of international students in Quebec had the bilingual language proficiency compared to in Ontario. So we can see that almost half. Uh, uh, I mean, only very small percentage in Ontario has the ability of both English and French proficiency. So again, I would say that along with the level of education and the type of educational institution and language proficiency, these three aspects are really important in terms of the labor market integration and labor market outcomes. Although we do not have much, do not have much research on this topic, or do not have recent studies that actually studied how language ability or other variables such as type of degree, the background of discipline, type of institutions, level of study, all these factors impact international students' labor market outcomes and their employment challenges. But this is this is an area where we have a lot of scope to understand what kind of challenges each group of international students face, and what kind of how they overcome those, and what kind of support and help they need to face those challenges.
To quickly interrupt, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, I'm almost done. So in conclusion, I would like to highlight a few points. First, the number of international students has been increasing in Canada for last, I would say 15, 20 years. And it's been increasing very quickly, significantly in last few years, 5, 6 years. However, when we look at their transition to permanent residency, we see lower than expected rate. And that is important because as long as international students are temporary migrants, they do not have access to the federally funded services as well as other social citizenship and labor rights. We also need to acknowledge and recognize that their social characteristics differ across places, particularly these two provinces in Ontario and Quebec. And the social variables that distinguish them are really important variables. So level of education, gender, the migration category as principal applicants, language ability, and so on. And these differences are important not only for labor market integration as well as for social integration. Therefore, we need to consider all these points that I just mentioned to understand how we're going to respond to different challenges that international students experience in Canada. And we know that they experience different kind of challenges in the labor market in terms of accessing health, housing, as well as adjusting socially and culturally within the broader society, as well as in the academic institutions. So we need to then consider their challenges in the context of their social economic differences as well as spatial differences. Thank you, and looking forward to your questions and comments.